The metallic snap of my gate lock hitting the gravel echoed through the quiet morning air. Sheriff Karen stood there with bolt cutters in her hands, smirking like she had just won some kind of victory. What she did not know was that cutting that lock had triggered something she could never take back. My phone was already buzzing with alerts, multiple alerts, federal alerts. I looked at her through my camera lens and whispered, "You have no idea what you just did." I had spent 3 years building my dream home on 40 acres of beautiful rural land in Cedar County. The property sat at the end of a winding dirt road, surrounded by oak trees and rolling hills that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was exactly the kind of place where a man could find peace after decades of working in the city. The security system I installed was not paranoia. It was common sense. Living this far from town meant that help would not arrive quickly if trouble came calling. The gate at the entrance was solid steel with an electronic lock connected to a sophisticated alarm system. If anyone tried to force entry, multiple agencies would be notified immediately. I had researched every component carefully. The system met all federal standards for rural property protection. Everything was legal, documented, and registered with the appropriate authorities. That Tuesday morning started like any other. I was drinking coffee on my front porch when I heard the rumble of an engine coming up my driveway. Through the trees, I could see a sheriff's patrol car approaching my gate. The vehicle stopped just outside the perimeter, and I watched as a woman in uniform climbed out. Sheriff Karen Martinez had a reputation in Cedar County. She was known for her aggressive tactics and short temper. Local business owners whispered about her surprise inspections and unreasonable demands, but I had never crossed paths with her before. I walked down to the gate, maintaining a respectful distance. "Good morning, Sheriff. How can I help you?" Her face was already red with irritation. "I need to search your property. Open this gate right now." "May I see your warrant?" I asked politely. "I do not need a warrant. This is a welfare check." I kept my voice calm and steady. "Sheriff, this is private property. Unless you have a warrant or probable cause of immediate danger, I cannot allow entry without proper legal documentation." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you refusing to cooperate with law enforcement?" "I am exercising my constitutional rights and asking you to follow proper legal procedures." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Karen's jaw was clenched, and her hand rested on her utility belt in a way that made me uncomfortable. I could see that she was not used to being told no. Sheriff Karen walked back to her patrol car and popped the trunk. When she returned, she was carrying a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters. The morning sun glinted off the metal blades as she approached my gate. "Sheriff, I strongly advise against damaging private property," I said, pulling out my phone to record. "This gate is equipped with a sophisticated security system that will alert multiple agencies if tampered with." She laughed, but it was not a pleasant sound. "You think you can scare me with some fancy alarm system? I have been doing this job for 15 years. I know a bluff when I hear one." "This is not a bluff, Sheriff. The lock is connected to a federal monitoring system. If you cut it, you will trigger alerts that cannot be stopped or canceled." Karen positioned the bolt cutters around the lock mechanism. "You are just trying to intimidate a police officer. That is obstruction of justice." My heart was pounding, but I kept the camera steady. "Sheriff Martinez, I am documenting this interaction for both of our protection. You are about to destroy private property without a warrant or probable cause." "Document this," she said, and squeezed the handles of the bolt cutters. The lock snapped with a sharp crack that seemed to echo across the entire property. The two pieces fell to the ground, and immediately my phone began buzzing with notifications. The first alert appeared on my screen before the lock pieces had even stopped rolling. Karen pushed the gate open and walked onto my property like she owned it. There. Was that so difficult? I stared at my phone screen in amazement. 5 different alerts had appeared in the first 30 seconds. The system had automatically notified the state police, the county sheriff's office, the FBI, and 2 private security monitoring companies. GPS coordinates, timestamps, and photographic evidence were already being transmitted to multiple law enforcement databases. "Sheriff, you need to see this," I said, holding up my phone. "I do not need to see anything. I am conducting a lawful search of your property." But I could tell she was starting to feel uncertain. The confidence in her voice had wavered just slightly. She was looking around my property now, probably realizing that it was much more sophisticated than she had assumed. The security cameras mounted on my fence posts were clearly visible. Motion sensors lined the driveway. Solar panels powered a communication array that could contact satellites if necessary. This was not the setup of someone who was bluffing about security measures. My phone buzzed again, another alert, then another. Karen was walking toward my house now, her radio crackling with routine chatter. She had no idea that her own dispatch center was about to receive calls about her location and actions. The automated system was already cross-referencing her badge number, with the incident reports being generated. I followed at a safe distance, continuing to record everything. My voice was steady as I narrated for the camera. "It is now 8:47 a.m. Sheriff Martinez has illegally entered my property after destroying the security gate. She was warned multiple times about the consequences of her actions." The irony was almost painful. She thought she was demonstrating her power and authority. In reality, she was creating a digital paper trail that would follow her for the rest of her career. My phone had become a symphony of alerts. Every few seconds, another notification appeared on the screen. The security system was working exactly as designed, sending detailed reports to every agency on the emergency contact list. Sheriff Karen was now walking around my property like she was conducting a thorough investigation. She peered into my workshop windows and examined my vehicle registration stickers. Her behavior suggested she was looking for any violation she could write up to justify her illegal entry. What she did not realize was that each step she took was being documented by multiple cameras. The system was recording her every movement, time-stamping each frame, and uploading the footage to secure servers in real time. My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I answered quietly. "This is dispatch from the state police. We are receiving automated alerts about a security breach at your location. Can you confirm your status?" "Yes, this is the property owner. A sheriff has illegally entered my property after cutting my security gate. She did not have a warrant or probable cause. I am currently recording the incident for documentation." "Sir, we have units responding to your location. Are you in immediate danger?" I looked at Karen, who was now examining my solar panel installation. "I do not believe so, but the situation is escalating. The officer appears to be conducting an unauthorized search of my property. Please maintain a safe distance and continue documenting. Our units should arrive within 20 minutes." I hung up and checked my alerts again. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had been notified due to the sophisticated nature of the security breach. Interstate communications had been triggered because the monitoring system crossed state lines. Even the Department of Homeland Security had received an automated report because my security system met certain federal standards. Karen had been on my property for 15 minutes, but she had already triggered the largest law enforcement response Cedar County had seen in years. My second phone rang. This one was the emergency line connected directly to the monitoring company. "Mr. Johnson, this is Central Monitoring. We show a code red security breach at your location. Are you safe?" "I am safe, but the situation is serious. A local sheriff has illegally entered my property and is conducting an unauthorized search. State police are en route." "Sir, due to the nature of your security classification, we are required to notify federal authorities of any forced entry. That process has already begun." I almost smiled. Karen had no idea that cutting a simple gate lock would result in federal involvement. The security system had been designed to protect against exactly this type of abuse of authority. Through my camera, I watched Karen examining my greenhouse. She was being thorough, probably hopping to find something she could use to justify her actions after the fact. But my property was clean. I had nothing to hide because I had nothing illegal. The alerts on my phone were now coming so fast that I could barely read them. Local police, state police, federal agents, and private security companies were all coordinating their response. The system had created a web of accountability that Karen could not escape. I continued narrating for the camera. "It is now 9:05 a.m. Sheriff Martinez has been illegally on my property for 18 minutes. She has ignored multiple warnings about the security system and continues to conduct an unauthorized search." In the distance, I could hear the first siren approaching. Karen heard it too. She looked up from the shed she had been examining and glanced toward the road. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in her expression. The cavalry was coming, and Sheriff Karen was about to discover that actions have consequences. The first state police cruiser came around the bend with its lights flashing but no siren. The officer who stepped out was tall and professional-looking, with sergeant stripes on his sleeve. He surveyed the scene calmly, taking note of my damaged gate and Karen's patrol car. Sheriff Karen immediately walked toward him with authority in her stride. "Sergeant, I am conducting a lawful search of this property. The homeowner has been uncooperative." Sergeant Williams looked at her, then at me, then at the cut-lock pieces still lying in the gravel. "Sheriff Martinez, I am responding to multiple alerts about an illegal entry at this location. Can you explain the situation?" This man refused to allow me access to his property during a welfare check. I was forced to gain entry. I stepped forward respectfully. "Sergeant, I have everything documented on video. Sheriff Martinez did not have a warrant or probable cause. I repeatedly warned her about the security system before she chose to cut the lock." Sergeant Williams examined the lock mechanism and the sophisticated camera array around my property. "Sheriff, did you obtain a warrant for this search?" Karen's voice became defensive. "I do not need a warrant for a welfare check." "A welfare check requires reasonable belief that someone is in immediate danger. What was your reasonable belief in this case?" I watched Karen struggle to answer. She had not expected to be questioned by another officer. Her face was getting red again, but this time it was embarrassment rather than anger. "I received reports of suspicious activity at this location," she finally said. Sergeant Williams looked at me. "Sir, may I see your documentation of this incident?" I handed him my phone, which was still recording. He scrolled through the alerts and watched the video of Karen cutting the lock. His expression remained neutral, but I could see him taking mental notes. A second state police vehicle arrived, followed by a sheriff's department car from the county seat. The responding officers gathered around Sergeant Williams as he briefed them on the situation. Karen was now surrounded by fellow law enforcement officers who were examining her actions with professional skepticism. The dynamic had shifted completely. She was no longer the authority figure in charge. She was the subject of an investigation. "Sheriff Martinez," Sergeant Williams said, "I need you to explain why you believed you had the legal authority to destroy private property without a warrant." "I was investigating suspicious activity," Karen repeated, but her voice lacked conviction. "What specific suspicious activity?" Karen glanced around at the assembled officers, clearly realizing that she was in trouble. "I received reports of unusual electronic activity at this location." I almost laughed. The only unusual electronic activity was the sophisticated security system that she had just triggered by her own illegal actions. Sergeant Williams was writing everything down in his notepad. "Sheriff, I am going to need you to provide a detailed written statement about your actions here today. We have multiple agencies involved now due to the nature of the security breach." For the first time since this ordeal began, I saw fear in Karen's eyes. She was starting to understand that her impulsive decision to cut my lock had created a situation that was spiraling beyond her control. The irony was perfect. She had come to my property to flex her authority and intimidate me into compliance. Instead, she had triggered a system designed to hold people like her accountable for their actions. Two black SUVs arrived at my property just after 10 a.m. Federal agents stepped out wearing suits and serious expressions. The lead agent introduced himself as Special Agent Morrison from the FBI's Civil Rights Division. The situation had escalated far beyond what anyone could have imagined. What started as Sheriff Karen cutting a lock had become a federal investigation into potential civil rights violations. Agent Morrison examined the damaged gate and reviewed the automatic alerts that had been generated. "Mr. Johnson, your security system is classified as federal-grade monitoring equipment. Any unauthorized breach automatically triggers our involvement." Sheriff Karen was standing near her patrol car, looking increasingly uncomfortable as more officials arrived on the scene. She had stopped trying to justify her actions and was now focused on damage control. "Sheriff Martinez," Agent Morrison said, "I understand you forced entry onto private property without a warrant. Is that correct?" "I was conducting a welfare check based on reports of suspicious activity." "What agency received these reports?" Karen hesitated. "The reports came through unofficial channels." Agent Morrison exchanged glances with Sergeant Williams. "Sheriff, we are going to need you to provide detailed documentation of these reports, including dates, times, and sources." I could see the trap closing around Karen. She had acted impulsively without proper documentation, and now federal agents were demanding evidence that did not exist. While the agents interviewed Karen, I received a phone call that changed everything. The caller identified herself as Mrs. Patricia Chen, a local business owner. "Mr. Johnson, I saw the news about what happened at your property. Sheriff Martinez did the same thing to me 6 months ago. She forced her way into my restaurant without a warrant and threatened to shut me down unless I paid what she called compliance fees." My heart started racing. "Mrs. Chen, have you reported this to anyone?" I was too scared. She said no one would believe me because she was the sheriff. But after seeing what she did to you, I think it is time to speak up." I immediately contacted Agent Morrison and put Mrs. Chen on speaker phone. As she told her story, the agent's expression grew more serious. "Mrs. Chen, would you be willing to provide a formal statement about these incidents?" "Yes, I have been waiting for someone to finally hold her accountable." Within an hour, 2 more business owners had called with similar stories. Karen had apparently been using her badge to intimidate local residents and extract what amounted to protection money from small businesses. Agent Morrison pulled me aside. "Mr. Johnson, what started as a trespassing incident has revealed a pattern of corruption and civil rights violations. Your security system may have caught one of the most corrupt sheriffs we have seen in this region." The investigation team grew larger throughout the afternoon. Internal affairs officers from the county sheriff's department arrived to begin their own inquiry. Federal prosecutors were contacted to review potential criminal charges. Karen's initial arrogance had completely evaporated. She was now sitting in the back of a federal vehicle, making phone calls to lawyers, and trying to explain to her superiors how a simple property search had turned into a multi-agency investigation. I watched it all unfold with a mixture of amazement and satisfaction. My decision to install sophisticated security equipment had been vindicated in the most dramatic way possible. By evening, Karen was facing potential federal charges for civil rights violations, criminal trespass, destruction of property, and corruption under color of law. The other victims who had come forward were providing statements that painted a picture of systematic abuse of authority. The security system had done exactly what it was designed to do. It had created an unbreakable chain of evidence that even the most corrupt official could not manipulate or destroy. Justice was finally coming to Cedar County. The federal grand jury was convened 3 weeks after Karen cut my gate lock. By that time, 7 additional victims had come forward with stories of intimidation, illegal searches, and demands for bribes disguised as compliance fees. I was sitting in the federal courthouse waiting to testify when my lawyer, Sarah Henderson, briefed me on the charges Karen was facing. The list was extensive and serious. She is looking at federal civil rights violations under Section 1983, criminal trespass, destruction of property, conspiracy, bribery, and extortion under color of law, Sarah explained. The prosecutors believe they have enough evidence to put her away for 10 to 15 years. The irony was staggering. Karen had destroyed my lock thinking she was demonstrating her power over a private citizen. Instead, she had triggered the most comprehensive investigation into police corruption that Cedar County had ever seen. My testimony lasted 4 hours. I walked the jury through the entire incident, from Karen's initial arrival to the moment she cut the lock. The video evidence was played multiple times, showing her dismissive attitude toward my warnings and her complete disregard for legal procedures. "Mr. Johnson," the prosecutor asked, "what was your emotional state when Sheriff Martinez destroyed your property?" I was frustrated and angry, but mostly I was determined to document everything properly. I knew that if I handled the situation correctly, the system would hold her accountable. The defense attorney tried to paint me as an anti-government extremist who had built elaborate security measures to avoid law enforcement oversight. But the facts spoke for themselves. Every component of my security system was legal, registered, and designed to protect property rather than hide illegal activity. Mrs. Chen testified about Karen's demands for protection money from her restaurant. Her voice shook as she described the fear she had lived with for months, worried that Karen would shut down her business if she refused to pay. She told me that health inspectors could find violations in any kitchen if they looked hard enough, Mrs. Chen said. She made it clear that paying her monthly fee was the only way to avoid problems. Other victims told similar stories. Karen had created a systematic scheme to extract money from local businesses using her authority as sheriff. The gate-cutting incident had simply been the moment when her pattern of corruption finally caught up with her. The civil lawsuit I filed was proceeding separately from the criminal case. Sarah estimated that the damages could reach 6 figures once all the constitutional violations and emotional distress factors were calculated. The beautiful thing about your case, Sarah told me, is that everything was documented in real time by multiple independent systems. There is no room for debate about what happened or when it happened. The local newspaper had picked up the story, and it quickly went viral on social media. The headline read, "Sheriff's Gate-Cutting Triggers Federal Investigation." The article included photos of my damaged lock and quotes from the federal agents involved in the case. Karen's department placed her on administrative leave pending the outcome of the criminal trial. Internal Affairs was conducting their own investigation into how many complaints against her had been ignored or covered up over the years. The most satisfying moment came when I received a call from Agent Morrison with an update on the investigation. "Mr. Johnson, I wanted you to know that Sheriff Martinez has been formally indicted on 12 federal charges related to civil rights violations and corruption. The grand jury found probable cause on every count we presented." What does that mean for the other victims? It means that everyone she intimidated and extorted will have their day in court. Your security system did not just protect your property. It exposed a criminal enterprise that had been operating for years. I hung up the phone and walked out to my repaired gate. The new lock was even more sophisticated than the original, connected to an upgraded monitoring system that could alert even more agencies if needed. Karen had tried to teach me a lesson about respecting authority. Instead, I had taught her a lesson about respecting the Constitution. The trial of Sheriff Karen Martinez became the biggest news story in Cedar County history. The courthouse was packed every day with reporters, victims, and citizens who wanted to see justice served. I was in the front row when Karen walked into the courtroom for the first day of testimony. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of the charges against her. Gone was the arrogant confidence she had displayed at my gate. In its place was the hollow stare of someone who knew their career and reputation were destroyed. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney James Mitchell, opened with a powerful statement about the abuse of power and the importance of constitutional rights. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about a sheriff who forgot that her badge was meant to protect citizens, not intimidate them. The evidence will show that Karen Martinez used her position of authority to systematically violate the rights of law-abiding people for her own financial gain." The government's case was methodical and devastating. They played the video of Karen cutting my lock, highlighting her dismissive attitude toward my warnings about the security system. Expert witnesses explained how the automated alerts had created an unbreakable chain of evidence. Mrs. Chen's testimony was particularly powerful. She broke down in tears as she described the months of fear she had endured, worried that Karen would destroy her family's restaurant if she refused to pay bribes. "I came to America to escape corruption," Mrs. Chen said through her tears. "I never imagined I would face the same problems here that my family fled from in our home country." The defense tried to argue that Karen was simply doing her job aggressively in a rural area where crime was increasing. But the evidence of systematic extortion was overwhelming. Bank records showed regular cash deposits that coincided with her visits to local businesses. Phone records revealed calls to city inspectors shortly after business owners refused her demands. My testimony focused on the constitutional violations and the sophisticated nature of the security system Karen had triggered. The jury listened intently as I explained how her single impulsive act had set in motion a chain of events that exposed years of corruption. "Mr. Johnson," the prosecutor asked, "what impact has this experience had on your faith in law enforcement?" "It has actually strengthened my faith in the system," I replied. "When one officer abuses their authority, other officers step in to hold them accountable. That is exactly what happened here." The defense attorney tried to portray me as paranoid for installing such an elaborate security system. But Agent Morrison's testimony put that argument to rest. "Mr. Johnson's security measures are exactly what we recommend for rural properties," the agent explained. "The system worked perfectly, documenting evidence that would have been impossible to gather through traditional means." Karen never took the stand in her own defense. Her lawyers knew that cross-examination would only highlight more examples of her abuse of power. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all 12 counts. The foreman read each verdict clearly: guilty of civil rights violations, guilty of extortion, guilty of conspiracy, guilty of bribery under color of law. Karen's face was stone as the verdicts were read. She knew that her law enforcement career was over and that she was facing significant prison time. Judge Patricia Morrison scheduled sentencing for 6 weeks later, but she made it clear that Karen's actions warranted substantial punishment. "The defendant violated the most basic trust that exists between law enforcement and the community," Judge Morrison said. "These crimes strike at the heart of our constitutional system." Outside the courthouse, reporters asked me how I felt about the verdict. I chose my words carefully. "I am satisfied that justice has been served. This case shows that no one is above the law, no matter what badge they wear. The system worked exactly as it was designed to work." That evening, I received calls from several of the other victims. They thanked me for having the courage to stand up to Karen and for installing the security system that made justice possible. The reckoning was complete. Karen's reign of intimidation and corruption was over. 6 weeks later, I was back in the federal courthouse for Karen's sentencing hearing. Judge Morrison had reviewed all the evidence, victim impact statements, and pre-sentence reports. The courtroom was silent as she prepared to announce Karen's fate. "Karen Martinez," Judge Morrison began, "you have been convicted of 12 serious federal crimes involving the systematic violation of constitutional rights and the abuse of your position as a law enforcement officer." I watched Karen stand to face the judge. Her orange jumpsuit was a stark contrast to the sheriff's uniform she had worn with such arrogance just months earlier. "The evidence shows that you operated a criminal enterprise under the color of law, extorting money from honest business owners and intimidating citizens who dared to exercise their constitutional rights. Your actions have damaged public trust in law enforcement and terrorized the very people you were sworn to protect." Judge Morrison sentenced Karen to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. She would also be required to pay full restitution to all victims and forfeit any property obtained through her criminal activities. Karen showed no emotion as the sentence was announced. She was led away in handcuffs. Her law enforcement career permanently ended. The civil lawsuit settlement came through 2 months later. Corinne's insurance company and the county agreed to pay damages that covered the destruction of my property, legal fees, and compensation for the constitutional violations I had suffered. The amount was substantial enough to upgrade my security system and help other victims pursue their own legal remedies. But the most satisfying outcome was not financial. The case had prompted comprehensive reforms in the Cedar County Sheriff's Department. New oversight procedures were implemented to prevent future abuse. Training programs on constitutional rights and proper search procedures became mandatory for all officers. Agent Morrison called me with a final update on the broader investigation. "Mr. Johnson, your case has become a model for how technology can be used to hold corrupt officials accountable. We are recommending similar security systems for other rural areas where oversight is limited. I used part of the settlement money to establish a legal defense fund for small business owners who faced intimidation from corrupt officials. Mrs. Chen was the first person to receive assistance, helping her pursue additional claims against the county for failing to supervise Corinne properly. The new lock on my gate was exactly the same model as the one Corinne had cut, but now it carried additional significance. It represented the principle that private property rights and constitutional protections cannot be destroyed by anyone, regardless of what authority they claim to possess. 6 months after the sentencing, I received a letter from Corinne in federal prison. She apologized for her actions and admitted that cutting my lock had been the biggest mistake of her career. She asked for forgiveness and understanding. I never responded to that letter. Some actions have consequences that cannot be undone with apologies. The security system continues to monitor my property 24 hours a day, but its most important function has already been served. It proved that accountability is possible when citizens are prepared to document abuse and demand justice through proper legal channels. Corinne learned too late that respect for the law applies to everyone, especially those who are sworn to enforce it. Justice was served, and the system worked exactly as the founders intended.